I just thought of a case where there really is no illusion of hard work and even talent, and yet we still prize the quote excellence, and merit in the same kind of draconian way, and that really that relates to physical beauty, right? Like take the world of
Yep.
models, right?
Yep.
Models and celebrities who are famous really just for being beautiful as opposed to having some other set of talents. It's obviously, I mean, I guess some work goes into it, but it's really just a story of good luck genetically and good luck that coincides with, certain cultural expectations of beauty. And so when we see these people on the covers of magazines, we don't say they deserve it because they work so hard, but they deserve it because that's who we want to see on the covers of magazines, right? We want to see the clothes on beautiful men and women and not ugly men and women for, reasons we could debate, we can and certainly we could debate the moral importance of this whole area, but it is just it's a strongly held preference that we want to see beautiful people in lots of situations where ugly people really won't do the job for us.
And that's fine. As a general rule, would much rather look at a gazelle than I don't know, a some stockyard horse or something. Whatever.
Mhm.
But there is a downside to it that creeps in there in terms of we know they had nothing to do with it, etc., which is sort of the flip side of we secretly like to punish. We get pleasure from it. The flip side is we have an implicit tendency to confuse external beauty with internal beauty. I
Mhm.
mean, it's now forbidden to actually say that, unlike people in the past, but all sorts of amazing studies, brain imaging studies showing where somebody is looking at pictures and they have to judge whether or not this is a beautiful face, scene, whatever, and
Mhm.
switching between that and scenarios where they have to decide was this a moral act on the person's part or immoral? And what you see is you're activating the same brain circuitry when you are identifying something you believe is beautiful and something that you believe is moral. There's a strong intertwining of that. And before you know it, that's why your physical appearance has a big influence on who gets hired and who gets convicted and who gets paroled and, that whole universe.
Mhm.
That's the dangerous side of that, that there's a sort of rotten underbelly to that also. We like beautiful things more. We attribute more positive attributes to beautiful things, beautiful people. And that's incredibly dangerous for those of us that luck did not smile on in that sort of way. So that's even a downside.
I think it's even more complicated and weird than that, and it obviously doesn't offer any scope for free will. But yeah, and I don't know where the research is on this, or if there's much research on this. I certainly haven't read it, but here's an intuition I have, which is that beautiful people have a very different life experience than ordinary
Yeah.
looking people, and that life experience can actually make them better people in certain ways and worse people in others. But it's if you just imagine what it's like to be the most attractive person in virtually any room you enter, right? Like to have really won the lottery and to have that just be obvious wherever you go. It's a little bit like being a celebrity. And it makes us a range of responses to other people available that most people find very difficult, right? I mean, there's a kind of, first of all, you're constantly encountering other people's desire to have some kind of proximity with you or to have a nice encounter with you or to make things nice for you or to have you like them, right?
Yep.
And that's not necessarily feigned, it's actually heartfelt, right? It's like, yeah, like people are attracted to you because of how you look, and that gives you a kind of superpower, right? I'm not saying it doesn't come with some downside, and there's a concern about whether you're ever really seen for who you are, et cetera, and then there's the superficiality of all of that attention, but it also, I mean, I have a little bit of experience with this, knowing some, very attractive people and just what their lives are like, the doors open for them in ways that are is quite I mean, it's quite beautiful. I mean, it's like in some ways, I mean, it's a great gift to be considered beautiful by virtually everyone, and, it's not to say it doesn't have a downside, but it definitely changes you, and it changes the way you effortlessly are with others, and so it's not so much that it's merely unfair that this preference gets expressed. This preference is hooked up to other capacities that are really coming from that person too, because, there's in many cases, this person is functioning better, not just because of how they look, but because of the consequences of having been perceived that way since the moment they could walk and talk.
Well, I think you're more sanguine about that than I am because I just mostly see the downsides because what that predominantly does is not just somebody who is being treated way better than average for reasons they had nothing to do with. And as you say, it's amazing the domains that creeps. People are going to think you're funnier than you
Mm.
actually are. People are going to think you're kinder, you're more insightful. That is not only that, but
But so just follow that a little bit further. Given that stimulus, people giving you the benefit of the doubt, unfairly more often than they give it to ordinary looking people, that has a consequence which allows you from very likely a very early age to take certain risks and to have those risks pay off, right? And to feel a kind of agency and a positive orientation in the face of uncertainty that more ordinary people don't feel because, when they took those risks, they got the door slammed in their face. I mean, it's not just an illusion. I think it is, in fact, the case that beautiful people experience the world to be a kinder place because it really is a kinder place for them.
and the downside there is it generates a belief that thus they should be able to be at the front of the line when the vaccines are being handed out, that they should be able to charm their way into something that other people would not have the privilege. I I think the entitlement aspect is just the most dangerous thing with it.
Mm.
I mean, I've benefited from human beauty to an enormous extent in that a beautiful person agreed to marry me, and that's a very good thing. But nonetheless, that's within an overall backdrop of it produces entitlement. And those of us who happen to be able to get good SAT scores have gotten a different version of
Yeah.
entitlement and mistaking a good vocabulary for a good moral compass or things like that. And in all these realms, I don't know, I
Yeah,
think
but the thing again, this is another analogy that actually sort of functions in the same way because having a good vocabulary, all things being equal, does open up moral domains which would otherwise be closed, right? Like if you don't know what the word Schadenfreude means, you can't have ever formed the thought whether or not it's a good thing, all the while you experience it, right? Like you're a consumer of Schadenfreude in yourself and others, and yet you've never formed the thought that, maybe this is something I want to reconsider in myself, though I find it pleasurable. And yeah, so it's only the sorts of people who do reasonably well on their SATs ever learn the term Schadenfreude in English, but it has a consequence, right? And so again, it's not so, we can't be so quick to dismiss meritocracy once we recognize that no one built themselves because there's a very fine-grained set of knock-on effects where all this unearned privilege does have a consequence which actually makes people function differently in the roles for which we would be tempted to deny them based on not wanting to capitulate to the bad math of unearned privilege.
well, the Schadenfreude, and I've never actually had the nerve to try to pronounce it even after figuring out Lebet. There's two issues with it. One is there's a whole bunch of people not only who don't know what that means, but who are illiterate, who are ancestral, who are where they didn't need a word in order to figure out that this is not a good thing. And the other is a double-edged sword to that in that this is also the means by which somebody could read and comprehend and be influenced by Mein Kampf.
Mm,
And smarts can cut both ways in all of
yeah.
these. And I think what we mostly see is producing people like that calcifies the status quo, makes people believe it is a just world when it is not, and when it is not remotely.
Mm,
And what meritocracy does, it's great that like we believe merit should have something to do with who rules us rather than it being like some mutation riddled first cousin marriage monarch who we believe was appointed by God. That definitely represents a good thing that we demand competence, but it is so flagrantly the case that there's unequal opportunities to achieve competence. Like the bad thing about meritocracies is that is not that we're having like completely incompetent people taking out your brain tumor. The problem
mm,
is the person will be competent, but they became that way because they had opportunities to do so, which was not remotely evenly distributed. And that's where the problem is. And that society biases that person to somehow think that they are a more worthy human, a more deserving
mm.
human, a more, as a result of that kind of thing. The trouble I see with meritocracies, throw out the criminal justice system, and all we have to do is protect society from dangerous people by constraining them. Blah, blah, blah. Simple. Throw out meritocracies in its conventional sense, and the problem is, you still got to motivate people to work really, 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 really hard and not go out and party with their roommate and study instead in order to become a competent neurosurgeon somewhere down the line. I have a lot of trouble. I don't know the solution for that one
Mm.
because you got to use reward pretty powerfully as an
Yeah.
instrumental tool there, that it's going to take a lot of work to, instead of somebody coming out the other end saying, whoa, I worked incredibly hard for that, somebody to come out and say, I am so grateful that I happen to turn out to be this sort of person with these abilities. That one's been challenging me. That one I think is a harder problem. It's easier to constrain people without moralizing at them, than to motivate people without doing a different version of moralizing them.
Mm. This issue of meritocracy and the asymmetry here between good and evil is interesting. I feel like maybe there's not that much adjustment needed apart from this emphasis on the role of luck and the appropriate emotion being gratitude, right? And a general disposition to spread the luck around insofar as that is possible, right? I mean, everyone should be able, in a just society, everyone should be able to avail themselves of whatever opportunity they can use, right? And some opportunities, it's, based on differential luck or, just preference, they won't be able to use. It was never in the cards for me to wonder whether I should go to the Olympics to run the 100-meter dash or do anything else at the Olympics, right? I mean, I was exposed to sports from the earliest possible age or, close enough, and I played some of them, and I played soccer through high school. When I got to Stanford, it was obvious to me that I had no business trying out for the soccer team, right? I mean, the year I believe the year I got to Stanford as a freshman, the Stanford team, the men's team, beat the men's Olympic team in an exhibition game, right? I mean, these are great soccer players. I was never going to be that kind of soccer player, and presumably there's no amount of effort I could have made. I mean, I guess it's possible if I had had some, overweening disciplinarian in my life whose sole purpose was to make me the best soccer player I could possibly be. I probably could have been a much better soccer player than I wound up being because, soccer was nothing like the center of my life. But presumably, if I was going to be that good a soccer player, I would have been so good so quickly that it would have become something like the center of my life because I would have been so rewarded by my ability in comparison with the abilities of others. If you look at like the David Beckham story, it's a story of, man, this kid is so damn good at soccer. Let's just shower attention on him from every angle and make sure he makes the most of this opportunity. And he still wasn't the best soccer player in the world, right? You put him on a field with Lionel Messi, and there's just no question Messi is the better soccer player at every stage of his career, right? So there's this lottery effect that you just have to recognize that you've won whatever lottery you've won and lost others, and the appropriate emotion for, those of us who are anything like the lucky side of, any of these distributions is just gratitude.